They called him Coffee. Not Cadet Voss. Not Aaron. Just Coffee. Because no matter how many times he washed his uniform, there was always a stain somewhere, dark brown, uneven, like a permanent mark of carelessness. And there was always that faint smell too. Bitter. Burnt. Cheap ration brew. To the veterans of the 7th Forward Line, it was proof enough. Proof that he didn't belong. "Look at him," one of the troopers muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "We're holding the rift against a mechanized invasion, and command sends us a barista." A ripple of laughter followed. Sergeant Havoc didn't laugh, but the corner of his mouth twitched, which was worse. Aaron Voss stood at attention anyway. Boots slightly dusty. Uniform not quite regulation. Eyes steady, but not confrontational. He didn't react the way they wanted him to. That annoyed them. "You even know how to fire that rifle, Cadet?" Havoc asked, stepping closer. Aaron met his gaze. "Yes, sir." "Then why do you look like you're about to ask it politely?" More laughter. Aaron said nothing. The Keeler Rift wasn't a place for softness. It was a long, scarred stretch of broken terrain where two forces had been grinding each other down for weeks. The sky above was never fully dark, streaked with distant orbital fire, glowing debris, and the constant flicker of anti-air bursts. The ground was worse. Mud layered over shattered rock. Craters filled with stale water. Jagged remnants of old defenses jutting out like broken teeth. And somewhere beyond the horizon, the enemy. Watching. Waiting. Advancing. Aaron had arrived 3 days ago. Fresh from the academy. Top marks in tactical theory. Near-perfect simulation records. Commended for adaptive thinking under constrained conditions. None of that mattered here. Out here, the only thing that mattered was whether the others believed you could keep them alive. And they didn't believe in him. "Hey, Coffee," another trooper called from the trench line. "You spill that drink on yourself, or is that your camouflage?" "Maybe the enemy will smell him coming and surrender," someone else added. "Yeah," a third voice chimed in. "Chemical warfare, caffeine grade." Even Havoc let out a short breath through his nose. Aaron adjusted his grip on his rifle. Still said nothing. That silence built a wall between him and the rest of them. They filled it with assumptions. He was nervous. Overwhelmed. They didn't notice the way his eyes moved. Tracking wind direction. Measuring distance between cover points. Noting how shadows fell differently as the light shifted from artillery flashes. Mapping everything. Late evening brought the order. A supply drone buzzed overhead, dropping a sealed container near the command post. Havoc retrieved the datapad inside, scanning it quickly. Then he snorted. "Well," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "looks like command has a sense of humor." The squad gathered closer. "What is it?" "Reinforcements." "Rotations." Havoc turned, eyes landing directly on Aaron. "Cadet Voss," he called. Aaron stepped forward immediately. "Sir." Havoc tossed the datapad toward him. Aaron caught it cleanly. "Congratulations," the sergeant said flatly. "You've been assigned a solo post." A few raised eyebrows. "Where?" someone asked. Havoc's smirk returned, thin and sharp. "The ditch." The laughter this time was louder. Longer. More genuine. Aaron glanced down at the assignment. Coordinates blinked on the screen, far edge of their defensive perimeter. A shallow trench marked as a temporary position. No turret support. No shield coverage. No nearby units. A blind spot. "Sir," Aaron said calmly, "is there any additional equipment allocated?" Havoc folded his arms. "You've got a rifle, don't you?" "Yes, sir." "Then try not to spill coffee on that too." More laughter. Aaron nodded once. "Understood." He turned and began walking before anyone dismissed him. That caught them off guard. No hesitation. No protest. No visible frustration. Just acceptance. "Kids either stupid," one trooper muttered, "or already dead." Havoc watched Aaron's retreating figure for a moment longer than necessary. Then he shook his head. "Doesn't matter which." The ditch was exactly what it sounded like. A long, shallow cut in the earth, barely deep enough to crouch in. Its edges were uneven, its interior cluttered with loose dirt, broken fragments of old plating, and scraps left behind from previous failed fortifications. It offered almost no real protection. And worse, it was visible from multiple angles. Aaron climbed down into it and stood still. For a full minute, he didn't move, didn't unpack, didn't adjust anything. He just looked. The wind moved first. A low, steady current sweeping across the terrain, carrying dust and faint static. Then came the distant sounds. Metal shifting. A far-off hum. Movement beyond sight. Aaron crouched slowly. Ran a hand along the inner wall of the ditch. Loose. Unstable. But workable. He exhaled. Set his cup down carefully on a flat piece of debris. Then he began. He didn't try to deepen the ditch. Didn't build it higher. Didn't reinforce it in any obvious way. So he changed how it felt. Scraps of metal were angled to catch light differently. Broken panels were positioned to create false edges. Small depressions were carved into the ground, not for cover, but for shadow. Lines were blurred. Depth became uncertain. Distance misleading. Hours passed. The sky darkened further, illuminated only by distant flashes. Aaron worked without rushing. Every movement deliberate. Every placement intentional. At one point he paused, listened, then reached into his pack and adjusted something beneath the surface. Small, precise, hidden. When he finally stopped, the ditch looked almost the same, but not quite. From the outside, it no longer read as a weak position. It suggested something else. Something layered, prepared, waiting. Aaron sat back against the dirt wall and picked up his cup. Took a slow sip. Still warm. Out beyond the ridge. Something moved. Shapes appeared in the distance. But careful. Observing. Not charging. Not rushing. Studying. Scouts. They approached just close enough to see the ditch. Then stopped. One tilted its head slightly. Another adjusted position. A third lifted a scanning device. And then, they hesitated. Inside the ditch, Aaron watched them without moving. Not even blinking too often. He took another quiet sip of coffee. And waited. The enemy didn't attack. That was their first mistake. They stayed just beyond effective range, silhouettes shifting against the dim horizon. Their movements were careful, too careful. They spread out instead of advancing, scanning from multiple angles, trying to understand what they were seeing. That hesitation told Aaron everything he needed to know. They weren't afraid yet, but they were unsure. And uncertainty could be shaped. A faint hum rolled across the terrain as their scanners activated. Thin beams of blue-white light swept across the ditch, passing over every inch of ground Aaron had touched. Heat signatures flickered across their displays. Metallic traces. Irregular contours. Signals that shouldn't have been there. Signals Aaron had placed there. He didn't move. Not when the scan passed directly over him. Not when one of the scouts adjusted its position and narrowed its focus. His breathing slowed, steady and controlled. His body blended into the uneven geometry he had created, just another broken line in a pattern that didn't quite make sense. From the enemy's perspective, the ditch wasn't empty. It was occupied. Multiple positions. Overlapping zones. Possible crossfire angles. Aaron let them build that story themselves. Because anything they concluded on their own, they trusted more. One of the scouts shifted forward. Slow. Deliberate. Testing. Aaron's eyes tracked it, not directly, but through reflection. A shard of angled metal gave him just enough visibility without exposing himself. Distance closing. Step by step. The others stayed back. Watching. Waiting for a mistake. Come on, Aaron whispered under his breath. Not impatient. Precise. The scout reached the outer edge of the ditch. Then stepped down. That was the moment. A soft click, barely audible. A sharp, controlled detonation. Not a large explosion. Not enough to tear the ground apart. But perfectly placed. The blast snapped upward with a violent crack, throwing dust and debris into the air. The scout collapsed instantly, its form crumpling before it even hit the ground. From a distance, it looked surgical, intentional. Like a perfectly timed shot from a hidden marksman. The echo carried across the empty terrain. Then silence. The remaining scouts froze. Weapons raised. Scanning frantically. But there was nothing to see. No muzzle flash. No visible movement. No second shot. Inside the ditch, Aaron stayed completely still. He didn't follow up. Didn't capitalize. Didn't reveal himself. That was the second layer. If he fired again, they would triangulate. If he moved, they would detect. If he rushed, they would adapt. So he did nothing. Minutes passed. Long enough for tension to stretch thin. The enemy pulled back. Slow at first. Then faster. They didn't retreat in panic. They withdrew in calculation. And that was worse. Aaron finally exhaled, just slightly. His fingers relaxed from the rifle grip. "Now you're thinking," he murmured. He reached for his cup and took another sip. Still warm. Still steady. Out beyond the ridge, movement increased. Not scattered anymore. Organized. More units were arriving. Larger silhouettes. Heavier equipment. They weren't sending scouts now. They were preparing a response. Inside the ditch, Aaron checked his supplies. Ammunition, limited. Power cells, traps, minimal. He nodded to himself. "Good," he said quietly, because if they were escalating, it meant the illusion was working. The ditch wasn't just a ditch anymore. It was a problem. And problems demanded solutions. Which meant the enemy would come back. Stronger. Smarter. More aggressive. Aaron leaned back against the dirt wall, eyes half-lidded but alert, listening to the distant hum of approaching forces. "Step 1, he said softly, lifting his cup again. "Convince them I'm not alone." The wind shifted, carrying with it the sound of marching. They weren't hesitating. They didn't come back as scouts. They came back as a force. Aaron heard them before he saw them. A low, synchronized rhythm, boots, metal, machinery, moving in controlled cadence across the broken terrain. Not cautious anymore. Not probing. This was deliberate. Measured. Prepared. He didn't look up immediately. Instead, he adjusted a small shard of plating beside him, just a few degrees. Enough to catch the faint glow of the sky at a different angle. A tiny change. But out there, it would look like movement. When he finally lifted his gaze, they were already spreading out. 3 squads. Wider formation. Overlapping lines of advance. They weren't going to repeat the first mistake. "Good," Aaron whispered. "Learn faster." The leading unit stopped just outside the ditch's effective range. Weapons raised. Scanning. This time, they didn't rely on a single sweep. Multiple sensor types activated at once. Thermal, motion, electromagnetic distortion. They flooded the area with data. And Aaron gave them exactly what they expected. Small heat spikes. Faint movement echoes. Residual energy traces in places no one was actually standing. Because he wasn't hiding from their systems. He was feeding them. One of the enemy commanders issued a signal. The squads shifted formation instantly. 2 units began flanking outward, circling the ditch from opposite sides. The third stayed centered. "They think I'm layered," Aaron murmured. "Front line, fallback positions, crossfire." He took a slow sip of coffee. They're not wrong. The first shots came without warning. Plasma fire tore across the ditch, fast, precise, controlled bursts meant to flush out defenders. The ground exploded in brief flashes of heat and light. Dirt kicked up. Metal fragments rattled. Aaron didn't return fire. Instead, he moved. Not far. Not fast. Just enough. A shot struck the spot he had been in less than a second before. Another followed, slightly off. Then a third. Closer. They were adjusting. Tracking. Learning. "Good," Aaron whispered again, sliding into a narrow depression he had carved hours earlier. "Keep chasing patterns." He waited. Counted. Measured their rhythm. 1 shot. A single, sharp crack from a position he had already abandoned. The enemy reacted instantly, returning fire toward the source. Adjusting formation. Pushing slightly forward. But Aaron was already somewhere else. 2 more shots. Different angle. Different timing. Now it looked like at least 3 defenders. Maybe more. The flanking units hesitated. Just for a second. But it was enough. Because hesitation, even small, spreads. Multiple shooters confirmed. One of the enemy voices transmitted across an open channel, just faint enough for Aaron to catch fragments. Unclear count. High coordination. Aaron smiled faintly. He shifted again. But silent. Unseen. Another shot, closer this time. Not to kill. To provoke. The center unit advanced a step too far. A small section of ground gave way, not collapsing, but dropping just enough to break formation. Confusion. Disruption. And then, silence again. No follow-up. No charge. No clear target. The battlefield felt wrong. From the enemy's perspective, nothing lined up. Their data showed multiple defenders. Their eyes saw none. Their formations reacted, but found nothing solid to engage. It was like fighting something that refused to exist in one place. Inside the ditch, Aaron checked his ammo again. Lower now. Noticeably. He exhaled slowly. They're getting closer, he said quietly, which meant the illusion had to hold. Just a little longer. Because the closer they got, the more dangerous it became. Not for him. For them. The flanking squads tightened their arc. The center unit prepared to push again. Heavier weapons were being brought forward now. They were done testing. They were going to break the ditch. Aaron leaned back slightly, closing his eyes for just a moment. Listening. Feeling the rhythm of their movement. Then he opened them again. Focused. All right, he whispered. His fingers adjusted the rifle. His posture shifted, subtle but ready. Now it starts to hurt. They chose to end it before dawn. No more testing. No more hesitation. Only force. Aaron felt the shift long before the first shot. The rhythm of the enemy changed. No longer cautious, no longer probing. Their movements aligned into something heavier. Final. Decisive. He looked up at the horizon. Faint light was beginning to bleed into the sky. Not enough to see clearly. Just enough to cast longer shadows. Now you rush, he murmured. The first barrage hit seconds later. Plasma fire rained across the ditch in controlled waves, methodical, sweeping, designed to erase anything that might be hiding within it. Explosions cracked against the dirt walls. Metal fragments tore through the air. Heat rolled over the trench in suffocating bursts. From the outside, there was no way anything inside could survive. They kept firing. Long enough to be certain. Silence. Advance. The command echoed across their formation. This time, they didn't spread out. They pushed forward together. Boots hit the outer edge. Weapons raised. No hesitation. They entered the ditch. And immediately, something felt wrong. The ground didn't behave the way it should. What looked flat wasn't. What seemed like open space narrowed suddenly. Angles twisted. Depth shifted. Their formation compressed without them realizing it. Wide spacing became tight. Clear lines of fire became blocked. Hold. Too late. A shot rang out. Close. Far too close. One of the front units dropped instantly. Contact inside. Where? Another shot. From the opposite direction. Then silence. They turned, scanning, searching. But the ditch betrayed them. Shadows overlapped. Shapes blurred. Nothing stayed consistent. It's a maze. No, it's not. It is. Their voices rose. Not fear yet. Confusion. Aaron moved through them like absence. But controlled. Precise. He never stayed in one place. Never fired twice from the same angle. Never let them build a pattern. One shot. A shift. Another. Then gone. It felt like multiple enemies closing in. Flank him. We can't, there's no space. Pull back. No, push through. Orders clashed. Signals overlapped. And in that moment, their coordination broke. Aaron didn't rush. Didn't chase. Didn't overextend. He let them collapse inward. Let their own movement trap them. A narrow channel forced 3 units into a single line. A slight drop disrupted another squad's footing. A broken panel redirected a charge into a dead end. Everything they did to regain control made it worse. How many are in here? Aaron paused just long enough to hear it, then answered, with a single shot. Silence followed. One by one. The noise faded. Gunfire slowed. Then stopped. Movement turned into stillness. By the time the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, the ditch was quiet again. Not empty, but finished. Aaron stood still for a moment, listening. Nothing. He exhaled slowly, then moved back toward the center. His steps were calm, measured, unhurried. The battlefield around him told a story of chaos. But inside the ditch, everything was exactly where it needed to be. He reached his pack, picked up the metal cup, took a sip. Cold now. He didn't mind, because the night had ended, and the ditch had held. Dawn came slowly, not with noise, not with victory cries, just silence. The kind of silence that settles after something irreversible. Across the Keeler Rift, command channels flickered back to life. Units reported in. Positions updated. Status checks rolled through the network like distant thunder. And then, one sector didn't respond. Outer perimeter, Grid 7. A voice crackled. Status. No reply. Grid 7 respond. Still nothing. Sergeant Havoc frowned. That was the ditch. He grabbed his rifle and motioned to two others. Move. They advanced cautiously, not because they expected resistance, but because something felt wrong. The terrain hadn't changed. The same broken ground, the same shallow cut in the earth, the same unimpressive stretch of mud and scrap. But the earth felt heavier. One of the troopers slowed. You smell that? Havoc didn't answer. He saw it. The ground leading to the ditch was marked, not with clean lines of battle, but with disruption. Scorch marks scattered in uneven patterns. Fragments of armor, discarded, not destroyed. Weapons lying where they had been dropped, not fired. Signs of confusion, of collapse. Spread out, Havoc ordered quietly. They moved forward, step by step. Then they reached the edge, and stopped. What the hell? The ditch was still there. Shallow. Ordinary. But inside, the aftermath told a different story. Not a massacre. Not a straightforward fight. Something else. Positions where units had clearly hesitated. Points where movement had bottlenecked unnaturally. Marks that suggested turning, retreating, advancing. All overlapping. All chaotic. It didn't look like they had been overpowered. It looked like they had been misled. Havoc climbed down into the ditch slowly, carefully. His eyes scanned every inch, trying to understand, failing. He saw him, Cadet Aaron Voss, sitting against the dirt wall, boots caked in mud, uniform still stained, rifle resting across his lap, holding a metal cup, drinking. Havoc just stared. For a long moment he said nothing. What happened here? Aaron looked up, calm as ever. They kept adjusting, he said simply. Havoc frowned. To what? Aaron took another sip. Me. The pause. They thought there were more of us, Aaron continued. So they changed how they moved. He glanced around the ditch. They never checked if there weren't. One of the troopers let out a quiet, disbelieving laugh. You're saying this was just you? Aaron didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked down at the ground. At the angles, the placements, the subtle distortions. Then back up. They made the rest happen themselves. Silence settled again. Heavier this time. Havoc exhaled slowly. Shook his head. Command's not going to believe this. Aaron shrugged faintly. They don't have to. Later that day, intercepted enemy transmissions were decrypted. Fragments at first. Broken signals. Then clearer. Avoid that position. Unknown defensive structure. High casualty zone. Designation confirmed. And finally, a name. Not a code. Not coordinates. A warning. Do not advance into Voss Ditch. Havoc read the report twice. Then a third time. Behind him, the squad stood quieter than they had ever been. No jokes. No laughter. No one said coffee. Because the ditch wasn't a joke anymore. It was a line the enemy refused to cross. And the cadet they had mocked had turned it into something else entirely. Not a trench. Not a defense. A lesson. One the enemy learned first. And one the squad would never forget.